Find somebody you want to work with who can do that. It's an innate part of people. I don't think that's something that you learn. I really don't. I think that's something that you either have or you don't have, and you either have a passion for that or you don't have a passion for that. If you are technical and you do have a passion for that, then great. Then you'll kind of already be reading books around negotiation techniques. You'll be figuring out, you'll have that burn inside you anyway. You won't really need any. You'll go and get advice, but you won't need to be told what to do. You'll find out for yourself. If you're sat there with the technology and you're like, oh, well, I've got to go and sell this, I don't really know how to do that, just go and find someone else to work with you. When you have a very strong technology person, it's rare for that person also to be a really strong CEO. It does happen, but it's rare.
It takes a lot. It takes a lot in the form of probably who you think will be your first customer will not be the first customer. It will be someone after that. And the reason for that is I think it takes an incredible amount of self-understanding. You really need to understand what you're selling them, and you need to get a lot of no's, or just in general a lot of feedback. It takes you some time understanding the space before you can figure out what kind of value you're really delivering. In our case, is with the footwear brand. And it's still, early days. We got a JDA with them, so that outlines the technical and business milestones that we would undertake together from the point of engagement. So, which is, they looked at our material, we showed them our life cycle analysis data. They were very, very, attracted by the value proposition there. But at that point, it was a concept to them, right? Because they haven't gotten the actual materials. And going through the milestones of producing samples for like laboratory data testing at third-party labs, and all the way until giving them materials to make tens of thousands of pairs of shoes, and eventually swapping all the material out in that component of their product, right? So having a document that outlines all the technical and business milestones, but knowing, of course, you're gonna have other contracts, like when you actually get to a commercial supply agreement or any kind of definitive contract later on for real repeat sales. So it's a journey, right? It's a journey you go on to build up a business with a partner that wants your product. So for us, getting to that point took us 5 years.
Not listening to customers around the actual device or around the technology, not experimenting with pricing models, wasting time chasing vanity kind of customers versus just working out who's actually going to be your core customer. I've seen some companies where they get bad advice from sometimes from other investors that, oh, you need to go and explore this adjacent market first before you move into that market. I generally don't find a good reason for ever doing that. I think just concentrate on your core market and don't get distracted. Long sales cycles, watch out for. Certain industries, you can spot it a mile off, will have very, very long sales cycles. And that's kind of scary unless you're positioning your technology as a truly transformative technology, and you can get some really good buy-in and just patient investors, patient capital. But I've seen some real problems emerge when, particularly in the healthcare industry, when other investors don't actually understand quite how long it takes to sell in, and they get impatient. That's a nasty spot to be in. Or just have a clear understanding with your investors of the market you're going after and the time it's going to take to get in there.
I don't think it was natural, because I think I was brought up in a family that was somewhat entrepreneurial, just because of the generation, my parents' generations, when China opened its doors economic wise, and so it was a lot of opportunity, right? My dad was an entrepreneur at some point, but he was also mostly a software engineer, and so I grew up in a family where, like, where everything was always kind of technical. And and also my education. So I realized I was always too factual when I was talking to people, right? And pitching was really hard. And thinking about the future in great definition and building conviction around is something I'm still working on getting better at. And that's hard. That's really, really hard. And so it's the selling part is not natural, but I do think that Jeannie and I also building off of like our real commitment for the problem and how the problem that we're addressing has caught on, you know, around the world. People now know the plastic pollution problem is big and everybody can play a part, you know, especially if you're a brand and you're sourcing raw material, you can play a part in making this problem become, you know, improved. And so I think we have an ability to bring people together and to build trust. I think if anything, that capability of ours makes up for the fact that maybe we might not be the most kind of compelling or optimistic people out there that makes any investor just go like, oh my God, here's 100 million, here you go, right? But you know, and the other part is and maybe this is an attribute of being women founders, but we also have a really good ability to bring people internally together. So even though, you know, as women, it's really hard to raise funding, you know, that's not a secret. But it's like what you do with the resources. How do you internally intrinsically motivate the people on the team? So these are the things that we do have as our pros. And I think every team has to kind of carefully look and say like, you know, what are our strengths? And in sales, you know, there are many styles of selling. And so for our purpose is more about creating value together, right? So can we create win-win situations? But yeah, it was not something that came to me immediately.
So you have two options. You've got a product, you either sell to new customers or you sell new products to the same customers. You need to make that decision. So assuming that you're taking your existing product and selling it to new customers, the challenges obviously become around marketing and how you change, adapt, or lengthen your message and your core value proposition to people outside of your existing core user group. If you're a B2C or D2C, you want to think about time to the customer and how much inventory you have in key sales regions and how much money you're going to have to invest into stock that just sits in warehouses. That's a key challenge. Actual shipping, I mean, like, you know, obviously you want to reduce that as much as possible to do that in as larger seabed volumes as possible. You don't want to be air freighting things as much as possible, although every startup always does. You know, if you're selling, I don't know, like watches or headphones, you want those next day delivery. And so you want to have inventory next to the customer in the same country as the customer. If you're doing kind of, you know, I don't know, like a lighting contract for a city where you like bid on it and there's a tender goes out, you bid for it and then you find out you got it and then you install it like 4 months later, then you can just store that stuff in China until you need it in the location. I think internally it's really important to have buy-in on a mission. That's probably the most important thing. If all of your founders, co-founders, and first employees are not kind of solidly bought in on the mission of the company, you're going to find that when things get difficult, you don't really know how to make decisions. Whereas if you're all kind of brought in on that, it'll be much easier, and you kind of aligned missions, and people have a kind of a common understanding. In terms of how you're perceived by the outside world, yeah, I mean, you know, you'll have certain things that you want to stand by as principles that help people to kind of assess you against those principles. So reliability. I mean, everybody says the same things like innovation, reliability, and like engineering prowess. Yeah. a multitude of different kind of descriptive words that would really kind of encapsulate how you want people to describe you. It's definitely something which gets more and more important as you grow. I think in the initial stages, you could probably waste quite a lot of time thinking about branding without thinking about culture. And ultimately, culture is what actually defines a lot of this stuff. And that's something which is built internally rather than something which is kind of said to the outside world.
I wish I could tell you, like, here's our strategy, here's exactly we put resources on it. Now, if we were to do it again, which we are doing for the product itself, it's a lot more organized, and we have a new head of marketing doing that. But to come to the name Novolube took working with 3 branding firms, and we didn't have much budget, right? So it was like really cheap projects, and because of that, a lot of the names you get are not really that good. And so working through that, and then internally also figuring out like what we're about. So we had, sessions, we had an offsite before COVID, like a couple months, actually a year before COVID. And so we actually had to like figure out internally what we're about. And then also it took a level of maturity in terms of commercial traction with customers to understand what do people want to, like what kind of a company do these brands want to be buying from, right? You have to really get all of that input to be able to create a name. And so that's why it took us actually a while to come up with this new brand. And we knew we had to rebrand for some time. And it's now thinking back to all of this, I think the most important part really just comes from the customer feedback. You really need to understand exactly. I think a really good exercise is figuring out, like, here's what I'm trying to sell, here are the kinds of people that would be buying it, what do they need to see, or what kind of a company do they want to be buying from, and really map out all of those attributes and figure out how do you turn that into your company culture and your aspirations. And if you can do that, then it is much more conceivable you can be successful. Any advice on branding would be that, but it's a very challenging process considering how saturated all of the naming spaces are.
A D2C company or B2C, D2C is direct to customer, B2C, business to customer. D2C, you are very careful in managing that message of who you are and what you stand for, because it's part of the intangible value that you're creating through this ridiculous thing called a brand, which really isn't anything apart from a story about who you are and what you do. B2B, that's less complex and more natural. Like, you kind of just become who you are by, you become what people say about you by doing what you do. You are the first people to create a biomaterial that everybody wants, and so you're kind of defined by that. Or you were able to deliver something 10 times cheaper and faster than a traditional legacy player was, and so you're kind of defined by that. But in the early stage, you're not trying to use emotion as a way to sell things. You're using technology, you're using speed, you're using cost, you're using discovery as ways to sell your product.